everyone? It's time for us to go and take a look at the iPhone 11 Pro Max and see how this particular iPhone holds up in 2024. Now, this iPhone is pretty much approaching 5 years old this year, which is so insane. I still remember the day this iPhone came out, and it was a pretty insane day because, there were lots of changes that this iPhone brought. And back in 2019, when this iPhone did come out, you have to remember that this wasn't like, a small upgrade, I would say, coming from the XS Max. I would say this is probably one of the biggest upgrades coming from one generation to the other from our iPhones. So I'll talk about that throughout this video, but if you want to pick up some iPhones I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 11 Pro Max, on the front of this particular iPhone, we are getting a 6.5-inch Super Retina OLED display. It's actually a Super Retina XDR OLED display, and it's a very good panel. It was a very good panel when it first came out. It was a little bit of an upgrade coming from the previous generation, which was like the iPhone XS Max. And the thing I liked a lot about these particular phones was that they looked very good. You didn't really need like a 90Hz or 120Hz display on these phones at that time, considering that the competition, the Galaxy S10, S10 Plus, the OnePlus 7 Pro, those types of devices didn't have 120Hz displays. Some of them had 90Hz displays, but still, even like the Pixel 4 and 4 XL, still having a 60Hz display at that time was perfectly fine. And I really do feel like this type of panel is still very good. You're getting the notch up top, which looks fine. You're getting a little bit of bezel around the display, but there's really not that much to complain about here. And I definitely do think that a phone like this in this day and age is still perfectly fine, and you are still getting a very, very good display when it comes down to it. So from that perspective, it definitely gets a thumbs up for me. On the bottom, you are getting that Lightning port, which is very cool. I think Lightning is perfectly fine for a lot of people. And if you're definitely going to consider having Lightning or not, it's perfectly fine. It's better than the old, 30-pin connector. And maybe it's not as good as USB-C, but it's still, something that's perfectly fine for a lot of people. And having a Lightning port is still perfectly fine for a lot of things that you're going to do. On the backside, you are getting that frosted glass back, which this was another big change. Coming from the XS Max, this was the first time Apple changed up the back from any glass back to the frosted glass back, which is a very good thing. This phone feels so premium, and even when compared to phones like the iPhone, 15 Pro Max for that example, this phone still feels very premium and very similar because of that glass back. I love having a frosted glass back. It feels and looks very good, and it definitely is one of my most favorite things going on for this particular phone from that perspective. So without a doubt, I love this phone because of that, and having these types of displays really stands out to me as being one of the better features of this particular phone. So that covers that. You are getting that triple camera setup on the top left, which is another big thing that came here. This iPhone was the first iPhone, this and the 11 Pro, were the first iPhones to bring a triple camera setup. And since then, every iPhone for the Pro and Pro Max have had some sort of triple camera setup. And that's another pretty crazy thing. Like, of course, with newer phones and older phones are getting other things, but like this phone having that type of capability was super cool. And I love having a frosted glass back and that triple camera setup because that makes this phone feel and look so much more premium, which I'm so happy about. On top of that, you're getting wireless charging, IP certification, lots and lots of good stuff beyond, just the front display of this thing. But I will tell you, there's still lots of overlap for sure between this and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. But it's not the most expensive premium phone. There's definitely reasons why the iPhone 15 Pro Max, came out. It's a better phone for sure on that one. But the 11 Pro Max, for its age, for it being 5 years old, I'm still very, very happy about the way this phone has aged the last couple of years. So that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera setup, this is another interesting thing to keep in mind here. So with the iPhone 11 Pro Max, you're getting that triple camera setup, a 12 megapixel wide telephoto and ultra wide camera, and you're also getting a 12 megapixel wide angle camera on the front. Now, the good thing here is that you can film in 4K at 60 on the front and the back of this particular phone. So having that ability of filming in 4K at 60 on the front and the back is very cool, and that's something I like a lot about this particular phone. Before this, we could do 4K at 60 on the back and 1080p on the front, but this was another first for these iPhones. This was the first group of iPhones, the 11 series in general, that could film 4K at the front and the back, which was a very cool feature to have. I will tell you though, the best thing about this phone in terms of camera is the fact that it does hold up hardware-wise pretty well against the latest generation for it having that telephoto and ultra-wide camera. Unfortunately, you can definitely tell that, with the newer iPhones, the camera quality is so much better, and I actually like the camera on the iPhone 15 Pro a lot more than even something like the 13 Pro, which I was coming back from. But I will tell you, you're still getting a ton of overlap, and having the latest generation of phone is still, probably the better idea, but you are still getting a very decent camera on something like the iPhone 11 Pro Max. So when you consider that it's a 5-year-old phone, it starts kind of rubbing in your mind like, oh, it's actually not that bad. But again, if you were to compare it against the latest generation, you would definitely tell you're having a little bit of an older device. The big thing here is that some of the photos and videos can look a little grainy depending on the condition, but it's not really even that big of a deal. And if you're getting a phone like this, you know what you're buying. Like, it's definitely not the most expensive phone of all time. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. In terms of software, this is the interesting area of this particular device. So the thing with the iPhone 11 Pro Max is that this particular phone, you're kind of in this like weird situation where it's like second in line to being discontinued. So you have the 2018 iPhones that are still supported, but then you have the 2019 iPhones, which, like I said, have a high likelihood of being discontinued sooner than later. And these iPhones are next up in line, they're next on the chopping block. And I would hate to recommend a phone to people that's already going to be outdated when you go and pick it up. And this phone, although it's not like outdated today and it's not going to be outdated when you buy it, probably, it's, on its last leg of software. And I wouldn't want to recommend a phone to people that's already on the chopping block of being discontinued. So just keep in mind that this phone is still supported right now, and it's still going to be supported if you buy it this year probably. But just know that from the time of me making this video, it's probably going to get iOS 18, and it might end off on iOS 18. So maybe mid 2025 to late 2025, that's when this iPhone's going to get one of its last major software updates, and then it's probably going to get security updates after that. So it's not the end of the world or anything. It's not anything super insane, but it's just one of those other minor things to keep in mind there. So that kind of covers it up from that perspective. Now, in terms of the performance side of things, this iPhone is giving you that Apple A13 body chip inside with 4GB of RAM. Now, I do think there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. The performance of this phone isn't terrible. It's not a terrible performing phone. It's a very decent performing phone for how, for how old this phone is. Realistically speaking, whatever I've really done with this phone, I've had a pretty good time with. And even when I compared it against phones like the 15 Pro Max or the 14 Pro Max, like, this phone does a good job at basically handling everything that I've thrown at it. I think it's a pretty good performing phone. And I think that's a very nice thing. When you actually look at this device, it gets a thumbs up for me because of how decent of a performing device this thing is. But keep in mind that when you are buying phones, you're going to want probably a better performing device maybe than this one, especially if you're going to keep it for like 5 more years. But for the time that this phone came out and for the time right now, it's actually not bad. Like, it's a pretty good performing device. And once again, that's something that I like about it. And like I said, if you're going to compare it against the latest generation, it's going to be slower, but it's not like a terrible performing phone by any means. So to kind of sum it up, what I'll definitely tell you is I like the iPhone 11 Pro Max a lot. I think this is a very good phone. And I do think that if you're going to purchase a phone in this day and age, this is a pretty decent option. I think it's a good phone if you want to keep it for the next year or two. But if you're trying to keep a phone for like 3 years or 4 years, I don't know if this is the one I'd recommend. Like, I would probably recommend the iPhone 13 Pro Max. It costs more than this thing, maybe like an extra $100 or $200. But that phone is going to be giving you a much better experience than this thing in every single way. But that is a more expensive phone. If you're wanting a cheaper one, this is the next best thing. And I do think this is a fairly decent option if you're trying to get a phone that's still going to be here, that's going to stand the test of time. It's going to be here for the next couple of years. It's going to be a decent option, but keep in mind there's better phones out there for a little bit more money. So that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.